You're a worthless piece of trash, Ethan. My daughter deserves better. My name is Ethan Hayes and I'm 37 years old. I've spent the last 12 years building a private investment firm in Chicago, making the kind of financial plays most people never even see happen. I work through shell corporations, anonymous funds and holding companies that keep my name buried in paperwork so deep that even the smartest lawyers take months to trace it back to me. That's how I like it. Clean, invisible, powerful. But right now, standing in my father-in-law's kitchen, watching him wave his coffee mug like he was conducting an orchestra of insults, I felt anything but powerful. The strong smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the expensive perfume of the designer kitchen was making me sick. Morning light poured through the enormous windows, reflecting off the Italian marble countertop and slightly blinding me whenever I tried to look in his direction. The story you are about to hear is a beautiful tale of revenge and romance. Subscribe to our channel for more content like this and comment what part of the world you're watching from. Robert Miller had been calling me useless for 3 straight years. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time I walked through the front door of his house. She could have married Dr. Peterson's son, he continued, gesturing toward my wife, Claire. But no, she chose you, a man who doesn't even have the guts to say what he really does for a living. Claire was sitting at the breakfast table, pushing eggs around on her plate. She never looked up, never said a word, just kept stirring those damn eggs as if they held the answer to everything wrong with our marriage. I could feel the weight of her silence more than I heard her father's words. "Ethan works in finance, Dad," she finally mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. Her voice was weak, almost inaudible, and it hurt more than any of Robert's insults. "Finance?" Robert snorted. "You know what that means. Nothing. He could be selling insurance for all we know. He could be managing some old folks' retirement funds in a corner office at a strip mall." I watched him pace around the kitchen's granite island, his face getting redder with each lap. This was Robert Miller, founder and CEO of Nexora Biotech, a struggling biotech company that hadn't turned a real profit in 4 years. He'd inherited money from his father's construction business and thought that made him some kind of financial genius. What Robert didn't know was that I had been following his company's financial statements for 8 months. Nexora Biotech was bleeding money, burning through what was left of their venture capital funding. They needed a miracle. They needed exactly the kind of anonymous investor I specialized in being. "You just sit there like a mute," Robert said, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "A real man stands up for himself. A real man fights back." I nodded slowly, feeling my pulse quicken but keeping my voice calm. "You're right, Robert." The kitchen fell silent. Claire finally looked up from her plate, confusion written all over her face. Even Robert seemed surprised by my answer. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the maid frozen in the pantry doorway, pretending not to listen. "I am right," he said, his voice now uncertain. "Absolutely," I said, standing up and grabbing my leather jacket from the back of the chair. The leather felt cool to the touch, and the sensation strangely calmed me. Claire really does deserve better. I walked toward the front door, feeling their eyes on my back. The hallway seemed longer than usual, each step echoing on the polished hardwood floors. When I reached the doorknob, I heard Claire's chair scrape against the floor. "Ethan." Wait. But I was already outside, breathing in the cold Chicago November air with that distinct smell of dampness and city pollution, knowing that everything was about to change. The electric gate of the house closed behind me with a metallic click that sounded like a full stop. I met Claire 5 years ago at a conference in Milwaukee. She was presenting research on gene therapy applications, brilliant and passionate about her work at a small biotech firm. I was there because I was considering investments in the medical tech sector. The auditorium was packed, but when she started talking, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the room. What I didn't expect was to fall in love with the speaker. Our relationship moved fast. Too fast, probably. Within 18 months, we were married in a small ceremony that her father complained about for weeks. He wanted something bigger, more expensive, something to impress his friends at the country club. But Claire and I preferred simple things, or so I thought. The problem started during our first Christmas as a couple. Robert had too much wine and started interrogating me about my work. I gave him the same vague answers I gave everyone: private investments, portfolio management, consulting for high-net-worth individuals. All technically true, but missing the crucial detail that I was the high-net-worth individual. My firm, Amberstone Investments, managed over $50 million in assets. We specialized in early-stage investments in tech and medical companies, the kind of deals that required discretion and anonymity. I had built my reputation by being invisible, letting other people take the credit, while I quietly collected returns most investors could only dream of. But Robert interpreted my discretion as weakness. He started making comments about my mysterious job and how a real man would be more transparent about his career. Claire would change the subject or laugh it off, but she never told him to stop. She never defended me. The verbal attacks escalated in the following months. Robert made snide remarks about my clothes, my car, my lack of ambition. He compared me to other men in their social circle, successful doctors and lawyers, who drove expensive cars and talked loudly about their achievements. I drove a discreet silver Honda Civic that didn't draw attention. To Robert, that was a sign of failure. What made it all worse was watching Claire shrink during these confrontations. The confident scientist I married became quiet and apologetic, constantly making excuses for her father's behavior. She'd pull me aside after particularly brutal dinners and whisper apologies, promising it would get better. But she never confronted him directly. She never put a stop to it. 3 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything. While researching potential investments, I came across Nexora Biotech's funding documents. The company was in serious trouble, burning through cash faster than they could raise it. They had approached dozens of VC firms, but their debt-to-revenue ratio scared off most serious investors. That's when I realized I had a choice. I could help save Robert's company through an anonymous investment, or I could let it fail. The businessman in me saw the potential for profit. The son-in-law in me saw something else entirely. I began the due diligence process, keeping my identity buried under layers of corporate structure. Robert would never know his salvation was sitting at his dinner table, listening to his insults, watching his daughter stay silent. The meetings with Nexora's lawyers were conducted through intermediaries. My name never appeared on a single document. I was just an investment fund based in the Cayman Islands with an interest in American biotech. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago at Claire's birthday dinner. We were at Robert's house and he had invited his brother-in-law, Charles, a heart surgeon who loved to talk about his vacation home in Lake Geneva. The table was lavishly set, decorated with expensive flower arrangements that gave off a cloying scent. Charles just bought a new boat, Robert announced as Claire cut the cake. A 40-foot speedboat, cost more than most people make in 5 years. Charles laughed and slapped me on the shoulder, a little too hard to be friendly. How about you, Ethan? Any big purchases lately? New car and investment property? I should have seen it coming. Robert's eyes lit up with that familiar glint that meant he was going in for the kill. Ethan doesn't make those kinds of purchases, Robert said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. He's more of the practical type, aren't you, Ethan? Claire squeezed my hand under the table, a warning to stay calm. Her fingers felt trembling and cold, but Robert wasn't done. I could feel the attack coming, like a storm building on the horizon. I mean, let's be honest here. My daughter is a brilliant scientist. She's been published in major journals, speaks at international conferences. She could have married anyone. A doctor, a lawyer, someone with real prospects. Instead, she settled for, he gestured vaguely in my direction, well, we all make mistakes. The room fell silent. Claire's hand went limp in mine. Charles was staring at the cake like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen, and Robert sat there with a satisfied smirk, waiting for my reaction. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second feeling like an eternity. I looked at Claire. Really looked at her. She was staring at her lap, her face flushed with embarrassment. Not embarrassment for her father's behavior, but embarrassment for me, for being married to someone her father considered beneath her. That's when I understood this was never going to get better. Claire wasn't going to defend me because deep down, she agreed with him. Maybe not completely, but enough to stay silent, enough to let him tear me down in front of her family. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table with deliberate care, and looked directly at Robert. You're absolutely right, I said, keeping my voice steady. She really does deserve better. I kissed Claire on the forehead. Her skin was warm and I felt her flinch slightly. I grabbed my coat and walked out. Behind me I heard Claire call my name, but I didn't turn around. I had work to do. I had decisions to make. And for the first time in 3 years, I was going to make them for myself. The drive home gave me time to think. For months I had been preparing investment documents for Nexora Biotech, a $3 million funding package that would save Robert's company and secure his retirement. The paperwork was ready. All that was missing was my signature. The envelope was in my office, waiting. Only my signature separated Robert Miller from salvation or ruin. I parked in the garage, sat in the car for 10 minutes, listening to the engine cool, making that characteristic ticking sound, and made my decision. I wasn't going to sign those papers. In fact, I was going to do something far more satisfying. I was going to let Robert Miller learn exactly what it felt like to need someone he considered useless. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Thomas Davis, and had him draft 3 documents. A formal withdrawal of investment interest in Nexora Biotech, a notice of contract termination for the pending funding agreement, and a release of confidentiality that would allow me to reveal my identity as the anonymous investor. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" Thomas asked during our meeting in his LaSalle Street office. The coffee his secretary had served was growing cold on the table between us. "You spent months on the analysis. The investment fundamentals are solid, family politics aside." "I'm sure," I said. "Sometimes the best investment is the one you don't make." By noon, I had everything I needed. Thomas would deliver the withdrawal notice to Nexora Biotech at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning. I wanted Robert to have a full day to panic before he understood what had happened. I wanted him to feel the ground crumble beneath his feet. I wanted him to know what it felt like to lose everything. That evening, Claire came home around 8. She'd been staying at her sister's since the birthday dinner, and I could tell from her posture that she'd been crying. Her eyes were swollen, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk," she said, settling into the armchair across from me in the living room. The distance between us felt wider than the few feet separating the chairs. "Okay, my dad called me today. He's worried he went too far the other night." I almost laughed. "Worried? He wants to apologize. Maybe we can have dinner this weekend, just the 3 of us. Start fresh." I studied her face, looking for any sign that she understood what had really happened. But Claire still thought this was about hurt feelings and bruised pride. She had no idea her father had just insulted the only person who could save his company. "Claire," I said carefully, "how long have you been ashamed of me?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "I'm not ashamed. You never, not once, told your father to stop insulting me. Not once in 3 years. He doesn't mean it. He's just overprotective. He called me worthless trash in front of your entire family. You said nothing." Claire's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to say. He gets so angry when people confront him. "So you chose his comfort over my dignity. That's not fair, but it was fair, and we both knew it." Claire had made her choice a long time ago. Every time she stayed silent, every time she made excuses for his behavior, she was choosing her father over her husband. And I was finally done being the second choice. "I love you," she said, which somehow made it all worse. "I know you do. But love isn't enough when you don't fight for it." She left an hour later, and I knew she wouldn't be back. Not really. Even if we stayed married, even if we went to therapy and worked through our issues, there would always be a part of her that saw me through her father's eyes. And I deserved more than that. The next morning, I woke up early and went to the office. The Chicago traffic was heavy as usual, but I barely noticed. My mind was focused on what was coming. At 10 o'clock sharp, I called Thomas to confirm the withdrawal notice had been delivered to Nexora Biotech. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Ethan," Claire's voice was trembling. "Something's happened. My dad's company just lost its lead investor. $3 million. He's completely falling apart." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "The lawyers won't say who pulled out. They said it was an anonymous investment group, but now they're claiming a breach of confidentiality terms. My dad is talking about bankruptcy, Ethan." Her voice broke on the last word. I stayed quiet, listening to her breathe on the other end of the line. I could picture her in her office, trying to hold it together while her father's world collapsed. "Ethan, I know you work in finance. Do you think you could ask around, see if anyone knows anything about this investment group?" The irony was almost too perfect. She was asking me to help find the investor who could save her father, not knowing she was talking to him, not knowing the salvation she was looking for was on the other end of the line, denying her help. "I'll see what I can do," I said. After I hung up, I drafted 2 text messages and scheduled them to be sent the next morning. The first would go to Claire. The second would go to Robert. They would both arrive at exactly 10 in the morning, along with a third message from Thomas Davis. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone would know exactly who they were dealing with, and Robert Miller would finally understand that the worthless trash sitting at his table had more power than he could ever imagine. The day of truth arrived with a typically gray Chicago sky. I woke at 6, unable to sleep any longer. I took a long hot shower, dressed carefully, choosing an Italian suit that cost more than the car I drove. For the first time in years, I wanted them to see who I really was. Revenge has its price, and I was willing to pay it. Not with money, with the truth. That afternoon at the office was the longest of my life. Every minute dragged like an hour. I reviewed the Nexora biotech files one more time, not because I needed to, but because I needed to be absolutely certain I was doing the right thing. The numbers didn't lie. Robert had driven a promising company into the ground through sheer arrogance. He had fired talented scientists, including his own daughter, because his ego couldn't stand to be challenged. At 9:30 that night, I called Patricia Evans, Claire's former colleague at Nexora. Patricia and I had met at several industry conferences, and she had always been frank about the challenges of working in biotech. More importantly, she had been an eyewitness to how Robert treated his team. "Patricia, it's Ethan Hayes, Claire's husband. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Ethan." "Of course not." "How's Claire?" "She's fine." "I'm actually calling about something else. I'm researching Nexora Biotech for a potential investment and wanted your perspective on their research capabilities." Patricia was quiet for a moment. The sound of her breathing over the phone seemed too loud in the silence of my office. "Ethan, can I speak freely?" "Please." Robert Miller is a walking disaster. Brilliant scientists, a solid research base, but the man has no business running a biotech company. He treats the research staff like factory workers and makes decisions based on ego instead of scientific data. "Can you give me an example?" "The neurotrophin launch. We had 6 months of trial data, showing the compound wasn't stable enough for clinical trials. Claire wrote a 20-page analysis explaining exactly why it would fail. Robert ignored it, pushed the launch, and lost almost $500,000 when the FDA rejected the application. What happened to Claire after that? Robert blamed her for the failure, said she was being negative and uncommitted to the company's success. He made her work environment so toxic she had to quit. Honestly, it broke my heart. Claire is one of the most talented researchers I've ever worked with. She had a bright future at Nexora, could have been director of research in a few years. Robert destroyed that because he couldn't admit he was wrong. And the other scientists who were let go? 3 people lost their jobs around that time. All of us who had opposed the launch. Robert wanted to make an example, to show that questioning him had consequences. 2 of them left the country entirely, went to work for startups in Boston. He wasted incredible talent because his ego couldn't handle constructive criticism. After I hung up, I stayed in the office until almost midnight, thinking about everything Patricia had told me. The view from my window showed Chicago lit up, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. Each light represented a person, a story, a life. And here I was, about to drastically change at least 3 of them. Robert hadn't just insulted me at family dinners. He had destroyed Claire's career because she had the courage to tell the truth about his bad decisions. The $3 million investment I had prepared wasn't just saving his company. It was rewarding years of arrogance and poor judgment. It was validating his belief that he was always right, even when he was catastrophically wrong. More importantly, it would mean Claire would never have to choose between her father and her husband. She could keep both relationships intact, never confronting the fact that she had stood by silently while he tore me down. But now she was going to have to choose. And based on everything I had learned about Robert Miller, I had a feeling I already knew which choice she would make. I got home after 1 in the morning. The house was too dark, too quiet. I went up to the room that had been ours and looked at the empty bed. I remembered the First night Claire spent there right after the wedding. She had laughed when she saw I had put flowers in every room. Rose petals, violets, sunflowers. You're kind of cheesy, you know, she had said, but she was smiling. Where had that Claire gone? When had she started seeing me through her father's eyes instead of her own? At 6 a.m. I was awake again. I drank strong black coffee and reviewed the scheduled messages one last time. The first message to Claire was simple and direct. The second to Robert was even shorter. Both contained the same devastating piece of information, but the tone was completely different. For Claire, there was regret. For Robert, there were only facts. At 9:58, I sat at my office desk and waited. My phone was in front of me, face down. I could hear the tick-tock of the clock on the wall, each second echoing in the silence. At 10 o'clock sharp, the phone buzzed twice. The messages had been sent. There was no turning back. 3 minutes later, my phone started ringing. It was Claire. I answered on the third ring. "Ethan." Her voice came out in a raw whisper. "What did you do?" "I told the truth. You destroyed my father. You destroyed his company. How could you?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Claire, your father called me worthless trash in front of your entire family. He treated me like I was less than nothing for 3 years. And you never, not once, defended me. So this is revenge? Are you that small?" The word small echoed in my head. Small, as if defending my dignity was some petty act, as if demanding basic respect was being spiteful. "It's not revenge, Claire. It's a consequence. Your father has spent years treating people like garbage. The scientists who work for him, you, me. It's time he learned that actions have consequences." I heard her sob on the other end of the line. "Ethan, please. We can fix this. I'll talk to him. I'll make him apologize for real. I'll make him change. You had 3 years to do that. 3 years of humiliating dinners, of cruel comments, of being treated like an inferior. And you stayed silent. So no, Claire, we can't fix this. Because the problem isn't just your father. It's you too." She hung up on me. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert, and he was screaming before I even said hello. "You son of a bitch. You think this is funny? You think you can destroy my company because I hurt your pathetic little feelings? Mr. Miller, I don't think you understand the situation. I don't understand anything. Claire told me everything. You're the investor. You're the one who pulled out. That is correct. 23 people work for me, Ethan. 23 families depend on this company. You're willing to destroy all of them because I said a few things you didn't like. Actually, Mr. Miller, I'm willing to let your company succeed or fail on its own merits without my money propping it up. We had a deal. We had a preliminary agreement that I chose not to sign. No laws were broken. No contracts were violated. My lawyers made that very clear in the documentation." Robert was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. It had a note of desperation I had never heard before, and for a second, I almost felt pity. "What do you want?" "Nothing, Mr. Miller. I don't want anything from you. There has to be something. Money, a formal apology. What? I want you to understand what it feels like to need someone you consider useless. I want you to know what it feels like to be looked down on by someone who holds your future in their hands. I want you to feel exactly what you made me feel for 3 years." I hung up and turned off my phone completely. I needed silence. I needed time to process what I had just done. Because for all the justification, for all the built-up anger, a part of me knew I had just crossed a line. I had used my financial power as a weapon. I had become the very type of person I had always despised in the business world. But then I remembered Claire's face at that birthday dinner. The shame on her face. Not shame for her father's behavior, but shame for me. And the guilt vanished. The next few days were a blur. Claire didn't come home. Robert called 17 more times, but I didn't answer. My lawyers handled all formal communication. Nexora Biotech was officially without its lead investor, and the news spread through the biotech community like wildfire. 2 other investors who had been considering coming in were spooked by the situation and pulled back. Nexora's debt-to-revenue ratio was worse than most people knew, and when an anonymous investor as large as me pulled out, it raised huge red flags. Why did he leave? What did he see in the books that we're not seeing? The speculation was unavoidable and destructive. A week later, I received the divorce papers. Claire delivered them herself, showing up at my office unannounced. She looked different. Her hair was in a messy bun, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. I signed, she said, placing the envelope on my desk. I don't want anything. You can have the house, the furniture, everything. Claire, no, Ethan, you made it very clear how you feel. And I realized you're right. I chose my dad over you all those times. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. And now he's paying for it. We're both paying for it. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I didn't expect. It wasn't anger or resentment. It was acceptance. Her deep, resigned sadness. I confronted my dad, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. I told him exactly what I thought of his behavior, about how he treated me when I was at Nexora, about how he treated you. I told him he destroyed my career and now he's destroyed my marriage. What did he say? That I was being dramatic, that I was letting you manipulate me, that you were an opportunist who had waited for the right moment to pounce. She laughed, a humorless sound. Funny, isn't it? Even now, even knowing you have 50 million in assets, he still thinks I'm the one who was played. I'm sorry. Don't be. You were right about him, and you were right about me. I wasn't brave enough to defend you. I wasn't brave enough to stand up to him. And now everyone is paying the price for my cowardice. Claire left the office and I didn't run after her. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew there was nothing I could say that would change anything. Some damage is permanent. Some relationships don't survive the truth. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a distance as Robert Miller's empire crumbled. Nexora Biotech went through a series of layoffs. 8 employees at first, then 5 more. The secondary lab in Milwaukee was shut down. The business journals started covering the story, focusing on the mysterious withdrawal of the lead investor. A particularly detailed article in the Wall Street Journal quoted several former employees who painted a picture of a company struggling with leadership issues and poor strategic decisions. Robert refused to comment, but the damage was done. His reputation in the industry was ruined. No one wanted to invest in a company run by someone known for ignoring scientific advice and mistreating talented staff. 3 months after our final confrontation, Robert put the Lincoln Park mansion up for sale. The $5 million property he was so proud of, with its heated pool and tennis court, now had a for sale sign out front. He was liquidating everything he could to keep Nexora alive for a few more months. The vacation home in Lake Geneva was sold at a loss. The Mercedes he drove was replaced with a used Corolla. Even his country club membership was cancelled. Robert Miller was experiencing the fall I had orchestrated, tumbling from the pedestal he had built for himself with inherited money and inflated arrogance. One day, a few months later, I drove by his old house by chance. I didn't plan it, but fate has a peculiar sense of humor. So I saw him in the front yard, crouched down, pulling weeds from a flower bed. He was wearing an old stained t-shirt and faded shorts. There was no more gardener, no more maid, no more driver. It was just him, sweaty and tired, fighting back weeds in a garden that used to be immaculate. He looked up as my car passed, and our eyes met for a second. There was no anger in his gaze, no pride, just exhaustion, a deep, pervasive weariness of a man who finally understood that his actions had consequences. And then he went back to pulling weeds as if I didn't exist, as if none of it mattered anymore. And maybe it didn't, because revenge, I discovered, doesn't bring the satisfaction you imagine. It just brings an empty sense of justice served, and the inevitable question, was it worth it? 6 months passed like a slow storm. Each week brought new news about Nexora Biotech. First were the staff cuts, then the closure of entire departments. The development team that had created some of the most promising gene therapy research in the country was dismantled, its scientists scattered to other companies or other countries. I got a call from Patricia Evans in April. She was in Boston now, working for a biotech startup that had just raised $50 million in funding. "Ethan, I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice had a hesitation that put me on alert. "Nexora is filing for bankruptcy. It's official. The lawyers are announcing it next week." I was quiet, processing the information. A part of me knew it was coming. The numbers didn't lie, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way financial reports couldn't. "How's Robert?" I asked, surprising myself that I cared. Patricia sighed. Word is he's taking a consulting position at Biogen Corp. Small office near Midway Airport. $80,000 salary. For a man who used to clear $500,000, it's a brutal fall. And Claire, she's here in Boston too. Got a position at the Cambridge Biomedical Research Institute. She's publishing again, Ethan. 3 papers in the last 4 months. She found her voice in science, even if she didn't find it in your marriage. After I hung up, I stared out my office window for hours. Chicago stretched out below, chaotic and vibrant, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in every building, every apartment. How many other stories like mine were unfolding at that very moment? How many other people were choosing between pride and forgiveness, between revenge and compassion? The news of Nexora's bankruptcy broke the following Tuesday. The Wall Street Journal dedicated half a page to the story, tracing the rise and fall of Robert Miller. The article mentioned the mysterious investor who had pulled out, but my name remained protected by layers of corporate structure. Only a handful of people knew the whole truth, and I preferred it that way. What the article didn't mention were the 23 families affected, the lab technicians who lost their jobs, the scientists who had to abandon years of research, the receptionist who had worked there for 12 years and now had to start over at 54. They were the collateral damage in my personal war against Robert Miller. That realization haunted me at night. Lying in the king-sized bed of a house that felt too empty, I wondered if I had made the right choice. If defending my dignity was worth the destroyed careers, if my wounded ego justified so much collateral destruction. The answer never came. Only the silence of the early morning and the distant sound of Chicago traffic. In June, I made a decision. I sold the house in Lincoln Park. I couldn't stay there anymore, surrounded by memories of a failed marriage, of a life that no longer existed. Every room held a memory. The kitchen, where Claire made pancakes on Sundays. The living room where we watched movies curled up on the couch. The bedroom where we had planned a future that never arrived. I moved to Denver, where I opened a new office for Amberstone Investments. The city was different from Chicago. Calmer, more organized, less chaotic. It was exactly what I needed. The Mountain West had a growing business community, promising tech startups, and enough distance from the memories that haunted me. The first month in Denver was strange. I didn't know anyone. I had no history there. It was a blank slate, and that was simultaneously liberating and lonely. I rented a small modern apartment in Cherry Creek, overlooking Washington Park. I spent my mornings running around the lake, watching families have picnics, couples walk hand in hand, kids feeding the ducks. Slowly, I began to rebuild. New investments, new projects, new connections. I met a group of young entrepreneurs developing a telemedicine platform that had real potential. I invested $2 million and became an advisor. This time I didn't stay anonymous. I put my name, my face, my reputation behind the project. It was liberating to no longer hide. I found that I had spent so much time protecting my anonymity that I had forgotten what it was like to just be myself, publicly, without layers of corporate protection. One day in September, while having coffee at a bakery in Cherry Creek, I saw a familiar-looking man walk in. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. It was Charles, Robert's brother-in-law, the heart surgeon, who had been at that disastrous birthday dinner. He saw me at the same time, and for a moment our eyes locked. I saw recognition on his face, then embarrassment. He hesitated, clearly considering whether to pretend he hadn't seen me. But then he walked over to my table. "Ethan," he said, his voice cautious. "Mind if I sit?" I gestured to the empty chair. Charles ordered a coffee, and we sat in uncomfortable silence for a few seconds. "I'm in Denver for a medical conference," he finally said. "Didn't expect to see you here. I moved a few months ago, I heard." He stirred his coffee obsessively. "I also heard about Nexora. About you being the investor." I raised an eyebrow. "Robert told you?" "Not directly. But people talk. The business world in Chicago is smaller than it seems." He took a sip of his coffee. "Look, I wanted to apologize for that dinner. I should have said something when Robert went after you like that. Why didn't you?" Charles gave a humorless laugh. "Fear, probably. Robert is the kind of person you don't cross if you want to keep the peace in the family." But after everything happened, when the truth came out, I realized that peace at the expense of someone else's dignity isn't real peace. It's just cowardice by another name. How is he? I asked, not sure if I really wanted to know. Destroyed, Charles said simply. Not just financially, though, that too. But emotionally. He lost the company, the house, the status. He lost Claire too, and I think that's what hurt the most. She won't talk to him anymore. Moved to Boston and blocked his number. And his wife? Marcia is still with him, but it's hard. She comes from her own money, so they're surviving financially. But the marriage is strained. She blames him for losing everything. Says if he hadn't been so arrogant, so blind, none of this would have happened. I was quiet, taking it all in. A part of me felt a dark satisfaction. Robert was getting exactly what he deserved. But another, smaller, quieter part felt something close to pity. Do you think I went too far? I asked. Charles thought for a long moment. Honestly, I think Robert needed to learn that lesson. But the 23 people who lost their jobs at Nexora probably didn't deserve to be in the middle of it. Neither did Claire, who lost both her father and her husband. He was right, of course. Revenge is never surgical. There's always collateral damage. There are always innocents caught in the crossfire. Do you keep in touch with Claire? I asked, a little. She's doing well, Ethan. Really well, actually. She's focused on her work, publishing groundbreaking research. She's met someone too, a professor at MIT. She seems happy. The news should have made me sad, but strangely, it brought me relief. Claire was moving on. She was building the life she should have had all along, free from both her controlling father and the husband who had used financial power as a weapon. I'm happy for her, I said, and realized it was true. Charles finished his coffee and stood up. Take care, Ethan. And for what it's worth, I think you deserved respect. The way you got it was questionable, but the fact that you deserved it never was. After he left, I sat in the bakery for another hour, watching people pass by on the street. Denver was sunny, the kind of perfect spring day that makes you forget winter ever existed. And I realized something important. Revenge had given me justice, but it hadn't given me peace. Robert was paying for his mistakes, but I was paying too. With guilt, with sleepless nights, with the knowledge that I had used my power in a way I had never intended. I picked up my phone and called Thomas, my lawyer. Thomas, I need you to research something for me. The employees who were laid off from Nexora. I want a complete list with contact information. What for? I'm setting up a compensation fund. $100,000 divided among them based on their time of service and financial need. Anonymously. Ethan, that's not going to undo what happened, I know. But it's going to help the people who didn't deserve to get hurt in the process. 2 weeks later, the fund was established. Every former Nexora employee received a check with a letter explaining it was compensation from an anonymous investor who recognized the impact of the changes at the company. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small step toward repairing the collateral damage of my personal war. The response was immediate and emotional. I received letters through the lawyers, messages of thanks, stories of how the money had helped. A lab tech used it to pay for her son's tuition. A junior scientist used it to relocate for a new job in San Diego. Each story reminded me that actions have ripples, touching lives we never imagine affecting. In December, a year after the final confrontation with Robert, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Claire, sent from her address in Boston. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. The letter was short, handwritten in the delicate script I knew so well. Ethan, I heard about the fund you created for the Nexora employees. It was a kind thing to do. More than kind, it was the right thing. I've spent this past year thinking about everything that happened, about the choices I made, the words I didn't say, the marriage we lost. And I finally understood something important. You were right. I chose my father over you so many times that eventually there was no marriage left to save. And when you pulled your investment, it wasn't cruelty. It was you finally standing up for yourself in the only way you knew how. My father called me last week. For the first time in months, I answered. He cried, Ethan. He apologized for everything, for the way he treated you, for how he destroyed my career at Nexora, for letting his ego ruin important relationships. He said he lost everything that mattered, trying to prove he was better than everyone else. I'm not ready to forgive him completely yet, but I'm trying. Just like I'm trying to forgive myself for not being the wife you deserved. I hope you find peace wherever you are. I hope you find someone who will defend you in the way I never did. And I hope that eventually you can forgive yourself too. With love, Claire. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't write back. There was no need. Claire had said everything that needed to be said. And I had received the one thing that truly mattered. Not an apology, but an acknowledgement. An understanding that what happened was the result of choices we all made. Robert Miller learned what it meant to be dismissed, ignored, and considered useless by people who held his future in their hands. He discovered that respect wasn't something you could demand or inherit. It was something you earned through how you treated others, especially when you thought they couldn't fight back. And I learned something too. I learned that revenge, no matter how justified it feels, always carries a weight. I learned that power should be wielded carefully, because the ripples of our actions reach much farther than we imagine. I learned that sometimes the best revenge is to simply let someone face the natural consequences of their own character. But I also learned that justice without compassion is just cruelty by another name, and that true power isn't in destroying those who hurt us, but in choosing when to use our strength and when to choose mercy. Today, 3 years later, I run a successful investment firm in Denver. My name is on the deals I make. I don't hide anymore. And when I consider new investments, I always ask myself not just if it will be profitable, but if it will be right. Sometimes I still think about Robert, working in his office near the airport, a man who had everything and lost it because he couldn't see the value in the people around him. And sometimes I think about Claire, thriving in Boston, finally free to be the extraordinary scientist she always was. As for me, I learned that the most useless person in the room often turns out to be the one with all the power. But I also learned that having power doesn't mean you have to use it. Sometimes true strength lies in knowing when to keep your sword sheathed, even when you have every right to draw it. Life goes on, business grows, wounds heal, leaving scars that remind us of who we were and who we chose to become. And in the I found that revenge never brings the peace it promises, but accountability, doing what's right even when it's hard, and choosing compassion even when anger is justified. Those things bring something far more valuable. They bring the ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. And that, I realized, was always worth more than any revenge.